Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming to the East Hampton Library to this remembrance of Judith and Gershon Leiber. And on behalf of the East Hampton Library, we'd like to thank everyone for attending and Jeffrey Sussman for doing this, which is spectacular, and Anne from the Leiber Museum for providing these wonderful photographs. We're going to have a few films, little clips to show, and also there's some pamphlets. I see everybody has some pamphlets. There'll be some more if anybody didn't get one. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Jeffrey Sussman, the biographer, official biographer of the Leibers, who wrote the book Mere Bagatelles. And take it away.
Thank you very much. It's been my privilege over the last nearly 20 years to know the Leibers and to fall in love with both of them. I've never met two kinder, more generous, more creative and wonderful people, and it's an honor for me today to be able to talk about the lives of Judith and Gus Leiber. I'll just go through the lives of them because I don't know if all of you know about their fascinating lives, but they're extraordinary. Judith was born in Budapest, Hungary, and she okay. Is that better? Okay. Judith was a very bright child. She was tutored at an early age, and by the time she was a teenager, she spoke 5 languages. She was one of the brightest ones in the family, and the family decided that she should attend King's College in England in 1938 so that she could take over the running of a family cosmetics company in Romania. And Judith came home for summer vacation in 1939, and war broke out on September 1st. And her parents did not want her to return to England. They thought it would be unsafe for her to do that. Eventually, the Leiber, Judith, whose family name was Pito at the time, when Hungary allied itself with the Nazis, Judy's family was confined to what was a Jewish ghetto, and eventually to what was called a Jew house in Budapest. And ultimately they couldn't leave. They were confined to that area. And Judy's father was able to get her a job as an apprentice at a handbag company called Pessel. And there Judy started out doing everything, sweeping the floors, mixing glue, running errands. And eventually she said to the owner of Pessel, "I'm tired of these low-level jobs you've been giving me. I want to learn how to make a handbag." And he set her into an apprentice position where she learned everything about making a handbag, and she was ultimately the only woman in Hungary to be admitted to the handbag guild. Things got worse and worse for the Pitos as the war continued to go, and eventually Judy's father was arrested and sent to a Nazi labor camp to build anti-tank trenches because the Soviet army was advancing on Hungary, and they were in a position of getting the oil fields in Hungary, which the Nazis wanted to keep for themselves. When Judy's father was arrested and taken to this labor camp, Judy and a friend of hers went to the Swiss consulate and asked her friend's uncle, who was a member of the consulate, to issue a Swiss pass for Judy's father, conferring diplomatic immunity on him so they could get him out of the Nazi labor camp. They couldn't go to the camp because they were confined to this Jewish ghetto. They had to get a non-Jewish messenger to go to the camp and get her father released, and they made sure that he would bring back the Swiss pass. Someone in Judy's apartment building where she was living, a 15-year-old boy, noticed that the pass was typed on an Olympia typewriter. And he found someone in the building who also had an Olympia typewriter. And he wrote after Judy's father's name and family, thus conferring diplomatic immunity on the entire family, because their name was on a list of Jews to be sent to Auschwitz and to be exterminated. And that happened to a number of Judy's relatives who had escaped to France and were betrayed by the building superintendent who revealed their information to the Gestapo in exchange for money. Now, I got to interview a number of years ago when my biography of Judy came out, to interview her at the Holocaust Memorial in Lower Manhattan. And I'd like to play for you her account of what happened at that time when the Nazis were controlling that city. And one day, Judith and her father and her sister went out for a walk. They had been confined to a Jewish ghetto in a Jewish apartment building, and they just needed some fresh air. And they didn't expect anything bad to happen. However, they encountered Gestapo agents, and they immediately took off Judith's father to jail. And from jail, he was taken to a Nazi labor camp where he was forced to build anti-tank trenches. Judy did a wonderful thing in terms of getting her father released from that labor camp. And I think you would like to hear the story directly from Judy. It's an incredible story.
Well, you know, when those things happened to us, Eva and I went to the Jewish Community Center, and we stayed there because unless, you know, if we didn't, they would have deported us and put us in as, you know, we would have had to work as prostitutes for the Nazis. And we wanted to avoid that, so Eva had a friend who recommended us to go to the community center, and we went there, and there we met a lovely girl whose uncle had been working at the Swiss legation. And he helped get my father a legitimate pass. And my mother sent a mailman over there to the camp where Daddy was working, and he got out and he came back to the Swiss house to which we all went at about that same time. And he was in terrible shape. It was just a mess. Poor dear, he was completely, he felt awful. He was just, you know, like a wreck. Luckily, we managed to survive this, and around December of 44, because the Nazis wanted to have, you know, the area around the Danube River near the Margaret Island, the people that we were staying with, who had in a Swiss protected building, the whole building was emptied. We were all taken to the ghetto, and we were there until about the 15th of January when the Russians liberated us. And then we went back to our old apartment. Of course, our building was a mess, and we lived in the cellar for a while. And of course, the Russians took. I had a high-post sewing machine in the maid's room in our apartment, and the Russians took it down to the cellar and used it to mend their boots. And we were down in the cellar until we had a chance to go back upstairs, which took a couple of months, and then we were upstairs and we started to live halfway normally, which was pretty good. And my father had a vineyard near Budapest, you know, about, I don't know, maybe 100 miles away. And the fellow that was taking care of the vineyard used to bring us food, whatever he could find in their area, and they brought us some, you know, vegetables and things like that. And of course we got very lucky, because once I met Gus, he used to bring us turkey meat and bananas and oranges, and we really had fun. It was nice.
One of the things Judy didn't mention, which is very interesting, is the Swiss pass that her friend's uncle issued that got Judy's father out of the labor camp. One of Judy's neighbors saw that it had been typed on an Olympia typewriter and was able to write after Judy's father's name and family using the same typewriter, in effect conferring diplomatic immunity on Judy's entire family, which saved them from deportation to a labor or a concentration camp. Why don't you tell us how you and Gus met on the streets of Budapest?
Well, I had a girlfriend who wanted to rent their big dining room, their big living room to somebody, an American, and so she and I went to the corner of the end of our street where all the GIs were, all the enlisted men, and Gus was standing in front, and this girlfriend of mine was not shy, so she started talking to everybody, and she started talking to Gus and everybody else, and there was a Hungarian American who spoke to her in Hungarian, and she told him that she wanted to rent this room, and they did rent it to 2 women from delegation, which was very nice for them. And I went there because she wasn't sure that her English was good enough, and I had lived in London, so I helped her with the English. But didn't take too long. She met everybody, all the enlisted men, and she was hanging around with them. And I started going out with Gus, and we went around the city, and we went up to the Royal Palace and walked down, and from the palace to the area down there, which was an area that was sort of called the Taban, which was sort of a very nice area, But we went down through all the rubble, and after we went down, people said, "Well, gee, you shouldn't have walked that way. It's full of bombs and all kinds of things that you would get hurt." But we didn't think about those things, and thank God we didn't have any trouble. So we marched around, and we went to whatever museums reopened. And I remember I took us to several artists. One of them told him that being an artist is a terrible life. It's very, very difficult. And he was a famous Hungarian painter. But he said it's a very tough life. Poor dear. He wanted to do it, and there he is. He's doing it today.
And the Leibers came here on what was called a bride ship, which was a ship that transported American GIs and their European brides to the United States. Judy was sick the entire time coming over here, and has decided never to ever go on a boat again. The Leibers then settled in the Bronx in a very poor Orthodox Jewish neighborhood. And Judy got a job working for a company. One of Gus's relatives got Judy a job working in a company where Judy had to operate an electric sewing machine, which she had never operated before, so they fired her. And then she got a job at a company called Garay, which was a handbag company. And why don't you tell us about your experience working at Garay?
Well, at Garay, I mean, it was very interesting. See, one frame I used to frame the top of the bag, the front and the back, and another frame I would do the legs of the gussets, so it was a divided work. And I wanted very much, there was a sewing machine operator there whom I got very friendly with, and she said to me, "Judy, you don't belong in this place. Why don't you go to the handbag workers union and speak to Mr. Lublina, who is the president, and tell him that you can do all these things beautifully, and he should send you to somewhere where you could really work and do nice work." So I went to see Mr. Lublina, and he said to me, "I don't think you're able to do all this, but I'll send you up to Nelly Rosenstein, see if you can do anything there." I was there for 14 years. And in the beginning I was an assistant worker, they had a pattern maker, designer, and then I was his assistant, and he got sick, and then I got his job. And in the end, before they closed the factory, I even ran the factory. I did everything. I used to take all the patterns home at night and do all the, the dye work and, prepare for doing the, for the samples. And it worked out very nicely. I was very lucky. It worked out very well.
Judy was the only woman in the United States who could construct a handbag from start to finish. It had all been made on an assembly line process, but because Judy had apprenticed at an old world handbag manufacturing company in Budapest, she learned all the necessary skills and could make a handbag from start to finish, which was one of the reasons that she rose so quickly and so highly at Nettie Rosenstein. And by 1963, the Leibers had decided that it was time for Judy to start her own company. And could you tell us how you started your own company and what that was like?
We rented a loft. It was only 280 square feet. And we had 3 workers, plus me and Gus. And then there used to be a very nice bookkeeper at Rosenstein who had retired, and she came and helped us with some of the bookkeeping for no fee at all, which was very nice. And then later we got a girl who became the bookkeeper. And in the beginning, everybody had pack up everything and send it, and Gus used to go up to Saks and Bergdorf and Bonwit Teller and deliver the bags in the beginning. But as time went on, he didn't have to do that anymore. We had a shipping clerk, and we had a bigger factory. We had like 30, 40 workers. And then when we closed the business, when I sold the business, we had 200 people working for us, which was very nice. 100 of them were just making the beaded bags.
How did you come to make the beaded bags?
Well, the way I started, I decided that it would be nice to make a metal bag that wasn't gold, because the ladies wouldn't have to run to the bank and pick up the bag and then take it back to the bank when they were finished going out at night with it. So I made bags of brass that we gold and silver plated depending on what color the customers wanted. And when I started out, they sent me samples of the little box that I had designed, the first piece that I did. And it was so terrible that I had to put rhinestones on the areas that were a mess. Otherwise I couldn't have sold it. And once I started like that. In the end, I made fully beaded bags. That's where I started with that. So that's my favorite bag still, because it was the start of all of it, which was very nice.
And in the course of Judy's career, she got to meet a number of very famous women who became quite friendly with her. And why don't you tell us about your relationship with Barbara Bush and how she visited the showroom and took you to the White House?
Well, Barbara Bush, I made her the inaugural bag, which was made from a fabric that I got from Skazi because it matched her dress. And she invited everybody who worked on her inaugural gown, whether it was the shoes, the dress, the bag, the jewelry, whatever, and we were all invited to the White House for a luncheon, and we became very good friends. And she came once to visit us at the factory. Naturally, they had to check everything, they looked in every drawer, in every closet, in every cabinet to make sure that nothing was there that could be a problem. And then Mrs. Bush came, and she had a photographer with her, and all the workers, each one got a photograph that she had sent them that they had, where she was standing with each one, and they photographed it, and she sent them each a piece of it, which was very, very nice. She was a wonderful lady.
Judy and Barbara Bush became very, very close friends.
At Hunter Business School give you the courage to turn what could be into what is. At Hunter...
Sorry about that. Judy and Barbara Bush became very close friends. Whenever Barbara Bush was in New York, she and Judy would have lunch together at the Four Seasons, and they were often invited to the White House. They had a couple of Christmas dinners with the Bushes at the White House and visited them in Texas. There were other First Ladies that came to Judy as well. There was a funny incident once when Mrs. Reagan was going to accompany President Reagan to a summit in Russia, and she had spilled coffee on a white satin handbag that she had, and she called Judy's showroom because she needed to get another handbag, and she called, and the receptionist said, "Who's calling?" And she said, "Mrs. Reagan." And the receptionist said, "And from where are you calling?" and she said, "The White House." And she said, "What company is that?" Mrs. Reagan got her hand up. It was interesting the way they started their own company. As Judy said, she had been working for Nettie Rosenstein for 14 years, and even there she had designed handbags for the first ladies. The first one was in 1953 for Mamie Eisenhower. But she continued doing that right up until, I think, the year 2000, her handbags were used. But finally, before she started her own company, Gus said to her, you know, it's time that you stop working for other people. You're a creative genius. What are you wasting your time for? Working for what he called schnooks. Work for yourself. And that's how they started the company. And Gus was extremely supportive of Judy. As Judy mentioned, he would carry boxes of handbags on a New York City bus to Bergdorf's, to Saks, because initially they couldn't even afford a messenger to carry them. And their first batch of handbags failed. It was a kind of putrid green leather handbag. And no one bought it. I mean, it was exceedingly ugly. And they lost $75,000 on that. And they thought, oh my God, we've gotten off to such a bad start. And the company continued. And then Judy, of course, started working with crystals, and it absolutely took off. In addition to Barbara Bush, Judy also became a very close friend of the opera singer Beverly Sills. Judy and Gus had been in Milan to buy material for their handbag company, and they were staying at a hotel, and they were sitting in the lobby having coffee, and Judy saw Beverly Sills walking across the lobby, and she said to Gus, "I'm going to introduce myself to her." Gus said, No, please don't. I mean, what would she want with us? She's a famous opera singer. And Judy paid no attention to him, got up and introduced herself to Beverly Sills, and it turned out that Beverly Sills was a collector of Judith Leiber handbags. So she was very excited to meet her. And they too became very good friends. And eventually, Beverly Sills had in her collection 200 Judith Leiber handbags, which was just extraordinary. In 1993, the Leibers finally decided to sell their company. There were too many other companies that were beginning to copy what she was doing. She had created a niche that no one else had done. And when other companies began to see how successful it was, they tried to copy her. And they decided that they had sort of ridden the wave of this popularity, and it was time to sell the company. And they sold it in 1993, and Judith remained as a consultant with the new company for another 5 years. In 2005, Gus decided that he did not want the world to forget Judy's creations, that she had been a pioneer in her field and created something unique, and he wanted the world to always remember it and honor her. So to do that, he built a museum in Springs for $5 million, which is not a bad wedding present, right? And that museum exists today, and it houses hundreds and hundreds of Judith Leiber handbags, along with many paintings by Gus. And Judy tried to start a new business of creating ornaments made out of silver, but because she had sold the company, she didn't realize she had also sold her name. And Saks and Bergdorf said they would love to sell these silver ornaments, but they couldn't use the name Judith Leiber, and therefore they didn't feel they could be successful, because who would know who Judith Pito was? And so that business never took off. Over the last few years, the Leibers have gotten extraordinary recognition. There was a major one-woman show of Judith Leiber's handbags at the Museum of Art and Design in New York last year, and the Long Island Museum had a joint exhibition of Judy's handbags and Gus's paintings. And there have been countless gallery exhibitions which continue to go on to this day. Over the last year, I watched the sad deterioration of the Leibers. Judy had several small strokes, and towards the end, she was confined to a hospital bed in their bedroom, and several months before their demise, Gus had been diagnosed with congestive heart disease. And I would have either lunch or dinner with them at least once a month. And towards the end, when they couldn't go out, I would bring them lunch on Sundays, usually a bagel, salmon, and cream cheese from Goldberg's. That was their favorite luncheon food. On the Friday before they died, Gus had gone to the hospital. He thought he was having a heart attack, and he was released from the hospital in the afternoon, and they asked him if he would like to continue with medical care, and he said no, he's on hospice care. And according to the nurse who was with them, at 11:30 that night, Gus bent over Judy's hospital bed and said, "Sweetie, I think it's time for the two of us to go." At 5:30 the next morning, Gus apparently had a heart attack and died in his sleep. I was that morning I was on my way to do a reading at the library in Shelter Island, and Ann Stewart, the curator of the Leiber Museum, called me at 7:30, and I expected a phone call to say that Judy had died, because that's what we had been expecting for a long time. And she told me that Gus died, and I was shocked. I went to the reading in Shelter Island, and then I stopped in Sag Harbor on the way home to have lunch. And I said to my wife, I'm going to call Ann to find out how Judy is. And when I got Ann on the phone, she said to me that Judy died at 10:30. I was shocked and deeply saddened. They were like family to me, and it was like missing dear loved ones. I said at the ceremony, at their funeral, I said that if Romeo and Juliet had lived into their 90s, they would have been Judy and Kirsten Leiber. They were a lovely couple, and I hope that many of you had a chance to meet them, and if you didn't, I hope that you get to go to the museum and see their wonderful creations. Before I turn this over to Ann, the curator, at the museum. I'd like to find out if there are any questions that you have. Yes?
Are they buried here in Springs?
They're buried at a Jewish cemetery in Springs.
How did you meet them in the first place?
I had been writing articles and short stories for the East Hampton Star for a number of years, and I met Gus at a garden party where they lent their garden for a charitable event, and I introduced myself to Gus, and he asked me if I would like to have lunch with him the following week in the city, and she asked me if I would be interested in writing a biography of Judith. Of course. But, you know, I must say that I didn't know who Judith Leiber was at the time. But I spent a year interviewing Judy, and I fell in love with her. She was just a spectacular human being.
The company that bought Judith's company, when they tried to copy her designs, they weighed 3 times as much. Do you know why? When they copy the egg or the, dragon or one of them, and you compare it with the original, it's 3 times heavier now. Do you know why?
I have no idea. Do you know him?
I don't really know why. I do know that they came in one time asking me, how can we be like Judith Leiber? And I said, well, I'm a painter. How can I be Picasso? She was a genius and had figured out how to make them perfectly. And I don't think anyone else can make them as well.
Yes.
I was wondering, did Judy ever try her hand at painting? And more importantly, did Gus ever try his hand on making bags?
No, neither one ventured to impose on the other's territory. However, they inspired each other. And Anne will show you later a bag and a painting that have a mutuality to them, which is very interesting. Yes.
Did they ever want children?
Judy once said to an interviewer that her handbags were her children. Yes.
I know sometime Tiffany was involved with Judy's handbags, and do you know anything about that?
There were a lot of retailers that sold Judy's handbags because they regarded them as luxury items, which of course they were. The original handbag sold for between $3,000 and $5,000 each, so it would have been a perfect item for Tiffany's to carry. But other than that, I don't know any relationship that existed between Tiffany and the Leiber company. Yes?
You didn't talk about Gus's development as a painter, how that came about.
Judy helped Gus enroll in art school in Budapest. And he was the only person in the class that spoke English and couldn't understand a word of Hungarian. And he communicated with his teacher by sending him little drawings. And the teacher would either nod or say no. And when they got back to New York, Gus attended the Art Students League under the GI Scholarship. He worked with a group of artists, and they operated briefly an artists' co-op in the East Village. There were 10 of them, and they had a gallery where they showed their work. That lasted for just a few years. And Gus also taught art at a school in Newark, New Jersey. He continued to study not only at the Art Students League, but with a number of different artists who taught him lithography and etching and other aspects of being a well-rounded artist. Yes?
Did any of her family come
This is the mic.
besides her family?
Did any of her family come to the United States besides?
Her mother and her father came here. And her father was very entrepreneurial and ambitious, and he got a job with a major travel agency by telling him that he was 10 years younger than he was. And so he had a difficult time explaining to them why he was retiring at such an early age.
You also have a sister?
She had a sister, Eva, who died a few years before they did. Eva studied to be a pastry chef in Budapest. She was a very, very sweet woman. She lived just a block away from them in Manhattan, and she loved traveling around Manhattan. When she was in her late 90s, she would take the bus from Midtown East up to the Upper West Side to buy food at Leibers, and then take the bus back home again. And she was a very independent woman, and a delight. And she and Judy were absolutely devoted to each other. She died very peacefully. They were sitting watching television one night in the living room, and Eva put her head back on the couch, and that was it.
How did they decide to come out east? How did they come out here?
Gus was attracted initially to Springs because it was an inexpensive art colony in the 1950s, and he bought, I forgot how many acres, in 1956. I think it was 6 or 7 acres for $10,000, and that included 2 farmhouses, which he put together and made into a single home. And then, you know, because he had the eye of an artist, he was able to take each of those acres and design them, each one in a separate design. So there was one like an English garden, there was one like a French garden, there was a vegetable garden. It was fascinating, and people who visit the museum to this day can take a tour of those gardens. They're quite beautiful.
Did religion play any part in their lives?
Not really. I mean, they were what you would call non-observant Jews. They were well aware of their Jewish heritage, and how could they not be because of the Holocaust and what they went through in World War II. But they didn't participate in any organized religious events.
Is the museum available now? Because I once drove over and it said it was a sign. That was a couple of years ago. By appointment only or something?
No, there are special groups that are appointments, but the museum is open Saturdays, Sundays, and Wednesdays from 1 to 4 p.m.
In the summer.
In the summer, from Memorial Day to Labor Day.
And it still is?
Yes. And it will continue to be as long as Anne has her way.
What was the most surprising or your favorite story that you learned over the course of that year that you were interviewing her? Or just over time?
There were so many stories. I mean, you know, obviously the most poignant one was when a father was released from the labor camp. But one story that the Leibers found very amusing was Gus had to ask his commanding officer for permission to get married. And the commanding officer wanted to know who he wanted to marry. And Gus explained it, and the commanding officer said, well, she's obviously a prostitute, and she's just trying to get American citizenship. and so Gus had to go back and explain over and over to him that she came from a very nice, you know, upper middle class family, and she wasn't a prostitute, and she was working at a handbag factory, and so forth. And he finally convinced the commanding officer of this, and the commanding officer apologized and lent Gus his Jeep to take Judy on a honeymoon.
Who took over the estate now, since they didn't have children? They had all that land.
Well, there's the Judith and Gerson Leiber Foundation, and one of the trustees of that foundation is here and will speak to you about the foundation after Anne finishes her talk about the handbags and paintings.
I just want to mention the fact that I did have a great opportunity of meeting Judith and Gus at the museum, because once in a while visiting the museum, Gus would walk around and introduce himself along with his art. So I had the privilege of that. I'm also meeting Judith a couple of years ago, actually, and they seem to be quite happy, as you say. in their gardens. But they also gave me the privilege of viewing their Chinese antiques collection, which was sold at Sotheby's not too long ago.
That's right.
Times. And it was one of the nicest things that I didn't know that they had was a public viewing of their Chinese antique at the Leiber Stewart, who allowed my friend and I to view their Chinese antique collection, the Ming collection as well. So I just want to say thank you to the
And the library here has in its permanent Long Island collection the catalog that I wrote for that Chinese antique porcelain collection, if you ever want to take a look at it. Are there any other questions?
Would you speak of their quiet philanthropy and how they help other religious groups in donating their time and their property?
Well, the Leibers, they didn't like to show it, but they really had a social conscience. And they gave very much of themselves to others. Because Gus knew of the struggles for other artists and how difficult life could be for an artist, he donated a lot of money to help support indigent artists. And Judy was very helpful to young women who wanted to gain a foothold in the fashion industry. She helped get them jobs. She hired them. In terms of giving money, they donated $500,000 to Bar-Ilan University in Israel to establish an arts program there. Gus grew up in a very poor town, Titusville, Pennsylvania. His father was a junk dealer, and he donated money to the high school there to establish an arts program that will exist in perpetuity to help old high school students who are interested in learning about art. So they were very kind and very generous to a lot of people. They never spoke about it really, but and they never wanted any plaudits for it, but they did that because they felt this was their responsibility.
After their death, are they going to take over the family home, and what are they going to after their death, are they going to do anything with the rest of the land, like the home of the Judith Leiber and her husband?
I think that's being decided right now. I don't think there's been a decision made about that. But the museum will stay there, and the museum sits in a sculpture garden, and that sculpture garden will always be part of the museum.
One other short question. Why do you keep referring to them as the Leibers? Wasn't it Judith Leiber and Gus Gerson?
No, it was Judith and Gerson Leiber.
Oh, okay. I got it.
When did Gus decide to become an artist?
Gus started out working for a newspaper when he lived in Titusville. And he started out first by delivering newspapers and then becoming a printer's apprentice. But he always had a talent for drawing ever since he was a child. And it really, when he was in the last year of his military service, he realized he had to make a decision about what he wanted to do. And he decided that that's really what he was going to do. He wanted to be an artist. And he had no formal training up to that time. All his formal training as an artist occurred after he got out of the army.
Hello. Did they ever go to Israel?
They went a couple of times, and a couple of Judy's cousins were able to flee from Europe to what was then Palestine, and they've lived there since.
I know that I need that, but I got to say that I had the privilege of taking
I had the privilege of taking groups through the Museum of Arts and Design for the Leiber exhibition on a dozen there. And they came one day, I think it was opening day, and so I saw the artist, and I had about 20 people looking at the handbag. And I went over to Gus and said, would you like to say hello at least to the group? And I told the group that the artist was in our midst. And she spoke up and said, I'm not an artist, I'm an artisan. I thought that was really interesting.
Well, that's how they define themselves. She considered herself an artisan, and he considered himself an artist. But you know, the Metropolitan Museum of Art has 80 Judith Leiber handbags in its costume collection, and Harold Coda, who had been the curator of the costume collection, and he wrote the introduction for me to know Mere Bagatelles, he considered Judy an artist. Well, she was modest.
Was Gus successful as an artist?
Gus was somewhat self-effacing as an artist. He didn't push himself and did not try to put himself in the spotlight. I tried to do that for him, and it was a pleasure doing it. And I think towards the last 5 or 6 years of his life, he had a number of gallery exhibitions in which his work was highly recognized. But a number of years earlier, when Hilton Kramer was the premier art critic for the New York Times, he praised Gus in one of his columns in the Times as being a premier modernist artist.
I used to have the very gallery in East Hampton, and I showed Gus. I had been 2 one-person shows, and he was very much appreciated. He was a terrific guy. We had great reviews. A lot of the paintings that he did, very colorful, very strong, but they always had some sort of a figure with a cigarette. And people resented it so much. They said, oh, how could he paint like that? But anyway, we had wonderful shows, 2 one-person shows, and I was very proud of it, like everything else he did.
Thank you.
Could you please tell us about when Judith sprang her father from the labor camp?
I explained that a little bit earlier, but just to reiterate.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you referred to it, but I didn't hear the story.
Oh. Judith's father was arrested. The family went out for a walk one day. They were permitted to only walk within a 5-block radius of the apartment building they were living in. Gestapo-related troop, police arrested Judy's father and took him to a Nazi labor camp. Judy and a friend went to the Swiss consulate where her friend's uncle worked for the consulate. They got him to issue a Swiss pass. Judy was able to hire someone to go to the Nazi labor camp and have her father released. And someone in their building realized that the name on the Swiss pass was typed with an Olympia typewriter, and he wrote "and family," conferring diplomatic immunity on the entire family, and that's how they escaped Nazi persecution. Incidentally, that pass is in the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C.
I find it interesting that the one area that doesn't seem talked about enough, you have mentioned it, and I know they mention it when people go to the museum, is what a gifted gardener Gus was. And for someone who lives out here, that was the first thing you thought of when you think of the Leibers' home. He was one of the great gardeners, and I just wanted to add that to it.
Thank you. So we just have time for 2 more questions, and then I'm going to turn it over to Anne.
I just wonder, is there a record of exactly how many Judith Leiber bags are out there today that were created?
Anne will be able to answer that question.
From what I'm gathering, the family in Hungary was very wealthy. What happened to all their their properties in the Romanian area.
Yes.
Yes.
Did they get any of it back after the war? Not really, no. Or have they made any claims for it?
Not as far as I'm aware. Okay, I would like to introduce you now to Ann Stewart. She has curated the exhibitions at the Leiber Museum, and she can answer whatever questions you have about the handbags and the paintings.
Thank you.
All the way out the whole time, you could never find it. And I guess maybe they'll
Hello, everyone.
I'm Ann Stewart, and I'm the curator at the Leiber collection. Here's a photo of the Leiber collection if you haven't seen it. For both Judith Petto Leiber and Gerson Leiber, the seeds of their creativity were planted during World War II. Although Gerson was a talented artist in his high school art classes, his parents did not feel that being an artist was a suitable career. And so he began work at his hometown newspaper, excuse me, the Titusville Herald, first as a newspaper delivery boy and later as a typesetter. It wasn't until he entered the Army and was stationed in North Africa and then Europe, where he, pardon me, he was exposed to the great museums of the world, that he fell in love with art and became passionate about being a part of the art world. Although Judith was working towards a degree in chemistry from King's College in London, when she went home for the summer after her first year in London, the war broke out and she was unable to return to King's College. Everything changed for her at that point. Using her mother's collection of beautiful handbags that were gifts from her father whenever he traveled on business trips to the West, she decided to learn the handbag trade. She entered the Hungarian Handbag Makers Guild as the first female ever. She quickly worked her way up the ranks, from apprentice to journeyman and ultimately to master, learning to create fine handmade handbags from start to finish. She was the first female master handbag designer in Hungary. She said that Hitler made her a handbag designer. By 1943, she could no longer make handbags because of the laws preventing Jews from working, and also because of the scarcity of supplies. While the war raged around her, she said that she kept sane by designing handbags in her head. In January of 1945, when the Russians liberated Budapest, and she and her family were able to leave the ghetto, she started making handbags again. This was when she met Gerson Leiber on the streets of Budapest, where they both say it was love at first sight. Knowing of Gus's intense love of art, Judy helped him enter the Hungarian Royal Academy of Art, where he met a young printmaker and set up a studio with him
and immersed himself in art making when he was off duty from the Army. And Judy designed and made fine handbags for the lady personnel of the American legation. Her bags were beloved by the American ladies, and everything she made was purchased by them. I wish we had some of those in the collection, but we don't. When they arrived in New York, Judith entered the handbag industry, and Gus entered the art world and the Art Students League, where he studied with great mentors like Will Barnett. Gus was inspired by his beloved New York City, and made prints of her structures, buildings, bridges, rooftops, and power lines, while Judy was working her way up the ranks from a very inexpensive handbag manufacturer, Beret, to the finest handbag company in New York, Nettie Rosenstein, where she ran the handbag factory as the foreman. These are some of his, this is river reflection from one of the rivers in New York City. He was inspired by the city all around him. When in 1963, the Leibers opened Judith Leiber Handbags in a tiny loft on Madison Avenue, right around the corner from 33rd Street, they both became immersed in the New York fashion world. In his studio, Gus began making etchings, lithographs, and paintings, using the fashion aspect of Judy's work as his muse. Painting, Patti. This is Patti Kenner's painting, but it's 3 models in me. Beautiful painting. So Judy and Gus attended a number of runway shows, and he says it felt a fertile field for his work. In the 70s, 80s, and 90s, when Judy's career and their business had an influence on his work, his paintings and prints were exhibited in the Judith Leiber handbag showrooms and sold alongside the handbags. I'm not sure why this isn't going. Judy said she made patterns every single day of her life while she was in business. When they traveled to Europe, they went to all the museums in all of the cities, and she found inspiration everywhere. In those museums, in antique shops, and even in their vegetable gardens at their country home in Spring. Gus said that she could see a handbag in everything. She was inspired by books. Sorry, it's not. Anyway, she was inspired by books and paintings, museums and music, even James Bond movies. She was inspired by things she would see in yard sales, food dogs and Japanese lunch boxes, Turkish rugs and quilts, Art Nouveau designs in the Bauhaus. The beading of the bags began not as an artistic endeavor, but as a matter of necessity. The plating on the first metal bag was so bad that she realized some disguise was required. She decided that covering the bag with crystals would both hide and enhance. Frozen. Yes. They're a little out of the order.
Stay up there.
You want to help us talk? But we can get to the handbag.
That's nice. That's nice.
She decided that covering the handbags with crystals, the handbags were not merely utilitarian, but beloved works of art that were adored and collected by many. They are in the collections of some of the greatest museums in the world: the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City, the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, and the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C., where all of the First Lady's bags that she designed are on display with their inaugural gowns. The Leibers had a story that when they went to their beloved opera, they would count all the Leiber bags hanging on the shoulders of the ladies, and that it became easier after a while to count the bags that weren't hers. While Judith was creating the finest and most artful handbags ever made, Gerson continued painting and gardening. While at their country house in spring, Judith would make patterns for handbags every waking hour, and Gerson would work in his beloved gardens almost every waking hour. When he was not out working in his gardens, he was in his studio painting highly sought-after paintings of them. Using his gardens as his muse, in the late 1990s and early 2000s, he created many prints and paintings. Like the garden, these artworks give the viewer a sense of pulsating energy, as well as a sublime sense of peace and tranquility. We'll just have to remember what the garden paintings look like. Sorry. Oh, there's one. Oh, thank you. They're not in the same order as I sent them, so we'll just remember as we go through. As time went on, he started abstracting his garden images and using nature as his muse. He created his Gourd series and his Ode to Spring. As his interests turned toward abstraction, he worked with form, color, and line to make his paintings of the last decade. The shapes are pure abstraction, but created by one whose life was a partnership with nature and his garden. The rich colors remind us of the artistry that nature creates each spring. The forms may remind us of flowers or vegetables, gourds or buds, but are more the essence or spirit of these things rather than an illustration. Gerson Leiber considered these paintings some of his best. He says that these paintings, that they are the summation of a long search for clarity, honesty, and beauty. And then he adds, I sincerely hope they please. Judith Leiber designed her last handbag, the Peacock Minaudier, in 2004. As the peacock personifies grace and dignity like royalty, one cannot miss the brilliance of this choice as her final design. When visitors view the peacock at the Leiber Collection Museum, often all they can say is, wow, just wow. In 2005, Judith and Gerson opened the Leiber Collection, a magnificent Renaissance structure inspired by the temples that dot the landscapes of the great gardens of Europe. We call it the Leiber Taj Mahal, as Gus built it to honor the creative genius of his wife and to house their extraordinary collections of fashion and art. It is a beautiful container of their devotion to one another. Writer Mary Gregory says it perfectly when she writes, in their early days, each of them saw pain and suffering, For the rest of their lives, Gerson and Judith Leiber defined their own reality by seeking, cultivating, and producing beauty through an enduring, inspiring love for each other and for life. So does anyone have any questions for me? Yes.
It's my understanding that after you sold the company, they sort of regretted it and then tried to buy back the bag.
So they didn't regret it. She was already in her late 80s and was really ready to retire. She tried to retire numerous times, and she would go back for a special design or an event. But when she finally did retire in 2004 after the Peacock, she was really happy to retire. And in 2005, they opened the museum. So the museum started with about 600 handbags that she had in her personal collection. But since that time, we've been either purchasing or accepting donations of Leiber bags that we don't have. The goal of the collection is to have one of each of her designs. And someone asked how many 500 individual designs, right? And so even those individual designs would be a frame that might have 4 or 5 or 6 different decorations on that frame. So there are many, many out there.
So is there a registry of everybody who bought one?
So there's not. And unfortunately, when they did sell the business, it was before the internet. It was before really all of everyone having records of everything. But everything did get sold with the business. So we're sort of looking for a needle in a haystack to find the pieces that we don't have. That's Mondrian. That's Barbara Bush's handbag that was made for her inaugural ball. For her husband's inaugural ball. This was one of Mrs. Leiber's favorites, and visitors would come to the museum and say, "What is a bag that you don't have that you wish you had?" And she would always say, "I really wish that I had the Hollywood bag." One day, Kelly Ellman, who is a very large collector of Judith Leiber, was at the museum, and when she asked Mrs. Leiber that, I saw her, she had a kind of odd look in her eye, but we went on with the tour, and she went home, and then she called me, and she was like, "I have the Hollywood bag, and I'm going to gift it to Mrs. Leiber. I just want a photo of her opening the box." So she got that bag. And now when people ask, she wants the Gerson Leiber inspired Minaudier. And in some of these pictures, I have the Gerson Leiber inspired Minaudier with the painting that inspired it. But we have it on view. We have them on view together at the museum, so you can see them in real life there. Go ahead. So Minaudier is the word for a tiny pouch. It's a French word for the metal bags. So any of her bejeweled metal bags are Minaudiers.
A lot of Judith's bags were very small, and I understand when asked what a woman could carry, she had some very interesting comments, like $100 bill. Or,
She did. Well, she felt like, so these small bags were evening bags to her, and so they were for the ladies to go out on the town, and she said all you need is a stick of lipstick, a $100 bill, and a handkerchief. All of her bags came with a tiny little change purse, a comb, and a little mirror. So those were already in there, and not much room for anything else. But she felt like, what is your husband for if he can't carry the other thing?
I was lucky enough to meet them many times, and I always remember she had a wonderful sense of humor as well. And I was wondering if she ever watched the episode of Sex and the City, where they all the women had Judith Leiber bags, and what she thought of that.
She did watch that, and she did think it was great, funny, and she was very proud that they were honoring her. Yes?
This is a silly question, but are these bags one of a kind?
So they're not one of a kind. So she would make the sample, and that would go into her showroom, and the buyers would come in and buy, and then they would go into production. Even the First Lady's bags all came from a frame or a metal that was already in her collection. But she would change the fabric or change the design so it would match the gown and be for that First Lady, but none of them were one of a kind.
It was my understanding that when she sold the business, she wasn't permitted to take anything with her, and she would spend a lot of time buying back her bags and looking for her bags. Would you elaborate on that?
Sure. So when she sold the business, the new company, it was called Time Products, a British company, watch company. Of course, they wanted the archives. Luckily, she had bags that were her own, but there was an archive of about 1,400 of her bags that went with the company. We would love to have those in the museum, but we have spent the last 11 years trying to find one of each of her bags.
Hi, I have two questions.
Yeah.
So when she was designing the bags for the First Ladies, did they have any input in it? Was there a back and forth, or did they just totally trust her and she surprised them? And then my other question was, so after working so hard all those years and being so inspired, I would imagine that'd be so hard to turn off. So did she still kind of have these ideas or mention anything like that?
So the answer to your first question, each First Lady was different. They all did choose a bag that they loved from her existing collection, but typically they had already chosen their gown designer, and so she worked closely with the designers of the gown, but obviously the First Lady would have final say as to whether they liked the bag or not. They always loved the bag, but it was a collaboration really with the First Lady and the gown designer. So your second question, when she first sold the business, she stayed on for 5 years, like Jeffrey said, as the sole designer and a consultant. So for those 5 years, she designed all the bags that were made, the Judith Leiber bags, and that was the first time she retired after that 5 years. But they kept calling her back, and that was part of the reason. She loved making handbags. She loved her handbags. And so they would ask her to come back to do special designs. They would ask her to come, and she would go on the road and give talks about the Judith Leiber brand and her creations, as well as the new bags. But finally, when she decided it was really time to retire, was in 2004. And she didn't really look back at that point. The museum was opening. She really focused on the museum. And the creative director of the new company, Jana Matheson, would come with a team every year and visit. And they would always ask her, will you do one more? And she was like, no, really, I'm retired. So I think at one point she just really was like, okay, I'm done.
How much did she get for her company when she sold it?
So it's an undisclosed amount. I've been told it is between 15 and 18 million. There's different, do you know, Patti? No. They say that someone came along and offered them exactly what they wanted, and so they sold. They never told us what they sold for, and you read it in the press, and there's a range. So I'm not sure.
About 4 years ago, my husband and I went to the museum, and I had a big straw hat on, and I see it's Judith Leiber with her nurse at the time, and she had her big straw hat on. So we went over and we talked to her. She was lovely and very sweet. We took a picture of our hats on ourselves together, and then we see her husband just standing as near the doorway. And I went over and I said, I love your paintings, you did such a good job. He said, I'm just part of the scenery here. And he seemed so adorable and so cute. And she was his star. You knew that. It was just amazing.
They were so incredibly supportive and proud of each other. Every year when I would start curating a new show, it would go back and forth. She would want his work in the biggest gallery, and he would want her work in the biggest gallery. They both just adored each other and their work. Anytime a reporter would come in to write an article, even not knowing the Leibers, it always ended up being a love story. And they were so in love, even to the very end, and so proud of each other's work and supportive.
Hi. And back here we're sort of going, and how did you end up in this lucky job?
So, my background is I have a degree in drawing and painting. I have a master's degree in sculpture. I worked right out of college at the Metropolitan Museum, and then I managed Jeff Koons' studio, who's a famous New York artist. His pieces are enormous, 16 foot tall by 14 foot long, but I see so many similarities in Jeff Koons and some of these Minaudiers. And he said that his inspiration was the knickknacks of his grandmother that were on her mantle. And so I haven't asked him, but I'm almost positive some of those knickknacks must have been Judith Leiber handbags.
She said that after she found the Hollywood bag, there was one that you were looking for. What was it?
It's yours.
And she made that bag. I told her, I'm buying it because I thought it looked like my husband and me.
Yes.
The person had black hair in the thing and black hair on the person. We will give it to the museum.
Oh my gosh, thank you. That is so incredible. Thank you. So do you want to introduce yourself? No, people want to know. Incognito. Anyone else? Well, thank you very much. Please come to the museum. We are open on Wednesdays, Saturdays, and Sundays from 1 to 4. Don't leave yet. Don't leave. Patti Kenner is coming to talk about the foundation and answer some of those questions. This will be interesting.
Hi, I'm Patti Kenner, a friend of the Leibers. Unlike Jeffrey Sussman, I knew who Judith Leiber was when I met her. This is my first Judith Leiber bag. Isn't it gorgeous? I bought it at a charity auction. I never would have spent the money just for me, but if I was giving it to charity, I thought I could justify having a Judith Leiber. So I met Judith at Guildhall about 20 years ago. I don't know how many of you remember the exhibit we had at Guildhall, but Judith gave a talk. I saw her bags, and then she gave a talk. These are not my slides, so if you want to look at them, enjoy. She gave a talk, and she said she told her Holocaust story of living in a safe house in Budapest. And after the talk, I ran up to her and I said, oh my goodness, I chair a luncheon in New York at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. Will you be my speaker? She said yes. And that was the beginning of a 25-year friendship. Like Jeffrey and Barbara Sussman, I feel like they were my parents. I was very close friends with them. Many of you probably saw them at the opera sitting in a little box every time the Metropolitan Opera was at Guildhall. We went together every time for the past several years. Then we went out to dinner afterwards. Most of the people here who are my friends, those of you here who are my friends, spent parties, evenings, dinners with Judith and Gus, and many of you really got to know them at my house. I invited them everywhere, and we had a wonderful, close relationship. They used to live in the city. Obviously, they had an apartment in about 34th Street and Park Avenue, and they had this country house here in East Hampton that they bought in the 50s. Then, maybe 10 years ago, they decided it was too much to commute, so they sold their apartment in the city and lived here full time. I had a fabulous cook named Dora, who I gave up to the Leibers, and Dora took care of the Leibers for the past many years with adoration and respect and love, and took very wonderful care of them. I would come, as I say, we used to go out to dinner on the weekends, and many of my friends here in the room will know that they would ask me to do things, and I would say, I'm sorry, I'm with the Leibers. And they were so interesting and so kind and so fabulous. We had the most wonderful friendship. I love older people, and they were so wise, and their stories were so beautiful. I just had the greatest respect and love, and we had wonderful times together. Gus and I were a little bit different politically, but we had wonderful conversations, and I would wear my Hillary pin every time I went over, and we got our point across. I had their 70th anniversary dinner at my apartment in New York with a group of their friends, and the woman who Jeffrey Sussman told you walked up to Gus on a street in Budapest when he came in as an American soldier. She was there at the dinner at my apartment 70 years later, the woman who introduced us. She and her brother were there. We had a beautiful dinner, and I said to Gus, when did you fall in love with Judy? And he said, the minute I saw her on the corner of the street in Budapest. Theirs was an amazing love relationship. Judy was, what was hard for me to understand, I did not know them in their heyday when they were going to the Metropolitan Opera every Wednesday night, and when they had all their friends and lived a very elegant New York City life. I knew them as 90-year-old people in retirement in East Hampton. So it was very hard for me to understand. Judy must have been a dynamo when she was younger, running her 200 people company. But I knew them as, Gus would say, what do we have for dinner, sweetie? She'd say, whatever you're having, sweetie. They would hold hands at dinner. They were so respectful and romantic and had such great love for each other. They were such beautiful role models for all of us. It was just an amazing relationship. About the foundation. So Gus and Judy asked me, they created a foundation with the sole purpose of keeping the museum in perpetuity after their death. There was no purpose of the foundation before. It's solely to make sure, Gus especially, and Judy also, wanted this as a gift. Gus built the museum in honor of Judy and her incredible creativity, and their dream was that this museum will continue forever to honor Judy. So I promised him that that's what we're doing, and this museum is a gift from Judy and Gus Leiber to the community of East Hampton, the East End of Long Island, and to everyone. It's a very beautiful gift. So we will have, there's a current exhibit now that's very amazing in tribute to them. Usually the beginning of the summer we have a party opening the museum and having a party. We decided that this year we would wait until later in the summer, since they had recently passed. We wanted to have a low-key opening, which we did, and on July 28th, it will be in the papers and you'll see announcements. From 2 to 5, the Leiber collection will be open. You can walk the grounds, you can see the beautiful exhibit, and at 4 o'clock we'll have a program. It's an incredibly busy day in East Hampton. We have LBIS where I have to work. We have Guildhall, clothesline exhibit where I have to work. But we will also have the Leiber collection will be open 2 to 5, and at 4 o'clock we'll have a program. And someone asked about their philanthropy. They were very quiet in their philanthropy, but they gave so much. They never talked about it. And that's really the way you're supposed to do it. Give back, but don't talk about it. And we promise that this museum will continue forever. And if anyone wants to reach the beautiful brochure that Jeffrey Sussman did is outside. When you leave, please take one. You'll read all about their creative marriage and their creativity. And you can reach us at the museum. You can reach Anne, Jeffrey Sussman, or me at the museum. If you forget the museum number, ask the library, and you can be in touch with us. And we hope some of you will be part of the foundation to give this great gift to the world. Thanks for coming.
Yes.